How accountable are you to being accountable? With your friends, your family, your partners, how important is it to you?
Being accountable to specifically the opposite sex as a whole is super important. It almost feels like my job. Like I was talking about it before, where like I always have to constantly make sure that not only are the men around me good and okay, but like the environment is good and okay. And if it's not, then I'm out in these streets fighting for you as much as I can. Recently, I learned that I was talking to a good friend of mine, and I feel so slighted as a black woman by black men often. And I'm like, yo, this is what you need, da da da. But then I realized, like, I don't do that back towards black men. Like, being accountable to be like, what do you need from me? Like, what's too much? What's not enough? And how could I expect them to feel that for me, even though I feel like my case is more extreme as a woman? But like, I still have to be accountable and stepping forward and opening that door to be like, okay, what do y'all need? Even if it might slight me a little bit, I know I'm doing it, being better for the larger picture.
Until I became an adult, I didn't really understand the importance of having these non-romantic, non-familial relationships with black men. I felt like it was just like, oh, I know this dude, I know them, like, you know, we just like in proximity of each other, that's good enough. But I think the intentional relationships are super important. And also, like you said, just having that openness of like, yo, I'm messed up right now. Like I need something, without it being like, well, shit, I need stuff too. Like, what about me? Da 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 da. And I feel like in my interpersonal relationships with the men around me, I feel like there has always been a struggle to have that, because it's not easy to just be like, oh, this is what I'm dealing with, this is what I have going on, and I need support. Because I feel like just growing up, it was always like, you know, either your daddy, your brother, your man. Like, these are the three men that you should be able to go to. Like, it wasn't, I mean, you know, sometimes, on occasion. But it wasn't like I could just go up to any man in my neighborhood and be like, oh, I'm something's wrong, can you help me? It was like, my daddy, my brother, my man, that's it.
I have found that accountability has, I agree, it's definitely gotten more important when it comes to my relationships with women as I've gotten older. I don't think it was necessarily that women, and when I was growing up, were only seen as mom, sister, or girlfriend, because it was always that kind of fluidity, just because my family low-key ain't shit. And so, you know, like no offense to them, but it was always that kind of, you know, it was always that kind of fluidity. And it was like, is that my auntie? You know what I mean? Or was that your ex-girlfriend you just still friends with? You know what I mean? And like, from like that goes from like a lot of the men in my life, I was recognizing these kind of temporal relationships that they had with women. And I think not judging them, of course, because that's what they had and it was okay and, you know, consensual within that space and time. But when it comes to accountability within those, I definitely seen, especially with the older relationships and relationships that have lasted longer, accountability has played a really big role in how those men in particular hold themselves both around and towards those women. And the ones that last the longest usually are most accountable towards them, and, you know, in their protection and making sure, you know, and making sure that they're checking, like, especially when it comes to like their relationships with other men. I've seen a lot of that, like, where it's like, that's just my brother, you know, like, that's not necessarily blood related, but that's my brother, you know what I mean? And yeah, I think that's part of accountability too, is what ways, like, what does accountable mean in those relationships? Because I think it kind of varies, but it's definitely been more accountable in my perspective of what accountability means. More accountability means longer relationships with women, or with people in general.
I love that you said that, because when the question was first asked, I was thinking, like, what does accountability really mean? And I think something that I'm learning as an adult just in my friendships is that everybody has like a different version of what being accountable to them is. And so sometimes I can feel like I'm being accountable to my friends, but it might not be the ways that like they need me to. So I would love to ask everyone, like, what does it mean to you to be accountable?
Yeah, so much. Well, I think It's a good question, one that I think about more specifically now, but it has been an ongoing question for me, and I think part of it is that accountability is an evolution for me, and I think it truly resides with being able to articulate, own, and understand my own values, being able to act authentically upon those, authentically and accountably on a day-to-day basis. And then through those actions, I can be accountable to other people. And I think that accountability should take the form of love, ideally. And for me, love takes on a whole different array of actions and meanings. But ultimately, it's like, can I hold myself accountable to myself to actually act through love on a daily basis? And that's tough.
So I totally agree with that 100%, actually. But just to kind of go a little back on that a little bit, there's a couple of things that I wanted to kind of unpack. So one of the things was I kind of found it a little interesting that most women, well, according for Taylor, that she hasn't had a relationship that, or you either, that was outside of just familial or family or communal or built-in relationships, what I like to call it, brother, sister kind of thing. I feel like for a lot of black men, like for me personally, I can speak for myself, most of my best friends that were outside of that were black women. I haven't had I had a lot of black male friends, but most of my best friends have been black women. So like all my relationships outside have always been with black women, outside of my parents, stuff like that. So I kind of find it interesting that our dynamic is different when it comes to that, because I can go to black women for anything, ask for anything, they always come through, you know what I mean? And I think they kind of treat me the best too. So I've always kind of had like a strong draw to black women in a lot of ways. And like accountability was, for me, it was a little different, right? I only hold myself accountable for the women that I actually had a relationship with, whether that was a mom, a sister, or whatever have you. When it was other women that were not connected to me in an intimate way of any capacity, it was almost like I feel like somebody else will take a hold of that. Maybe she had a man, or she has a father or something of that nature. So I always feel like it was another man's responsibility to be accountable for that woman, because I'm accountable for the women that I know. Does that make any sense? I hope I'm kind of making sense there.
And the thing with that, I feel like, is it creates this culture of men feeling like that. So if you're a man and you only feel accountable for your mom, your sister, your girlfriend, or just the women you know, when she walks into the world, she's a woman that other men don't know. Mm-hmm. So when she goes into the world, there is no communal safety for her, because for the men who don't know her, it's like almost like she's fair game. Like, I don't care what happens to her on these streets. And so I feel like on a communal aspect, a lot of men do have that mindset of like, if I don't know you, I don't feel like I need to protect you or to worry about you. Whereas I feel as women, especially black women, we adopt communities all the time. Neighborhood kids who parents I don't even know. When we work places, we adopt each other. We adopt black women, adopt black men. When we see things going on like a real macro level across the country, across the world, like we adopt those communities and they become our own, regardless if we ever go there, if we ever speak to those people. And I feel like that's kind of more so in our nature, but I also want it to be in everyone's nature, because that's what a community is. I shouldn't have to walk down the street and just because I may not be from here, or maybe I'm from Oakland, but I'm in Atlanta, it shouldn't be this feeling of like, none of these men here care about me, or if something were to happen to me in this very public place, nobody's gonna come to my aid, because I know that if other black women saw something happening to me, no matter where I was clear across the country in Thailand, and a black woman was like, oh, you need some money, you having trouble getting your money out? Here's 600 baht, you be good for the night. And I had no worries. And so I want it to be like that on a real communal level, because like I said, the mindset that you have or had before, it just breeds that amongst the whole community of like, I'm just gonna take care of me and mine, and that's all that matters. But it's like once you leave that house, leave that neighborhood, now you're up for grabs and it's free reign on you if we don't have that sense of like, this is someone I should care for.
Being accountable in that same sense transfers over to your relationship with the same sex and same gender as friends. So I know at least for me and my girlfriends, like if they get into it with the guys who they're around or with their fathers or with, their child's fathers, I'm always thinking of ways that, okay, what advice can I give that makes sure that they're good, but also allows me to put a mirror if they were in the wrong, like, or if they're doing something, or if like, maybe you need to talk and see if he's okay, this, that, and the third, when that situation deserves it. And for men taking accountable too, I'm learning more and more, especially as I grow and as I move state to state, that there are a lot of men who have conversations with their guy friends that are like, yo, like, why are you talking like that? Or why are you this like that? I had a homeboy, and this is crazy. He went to Morehouse. This is my best friend. So I do have men in my life that are, we take accountability for each other. But he was like, yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was explaining a situation about meeting up with a girl, and she was drunk, and this, that, and the third, and they had sex. And my friend was like, yo, bro, that's rape. Like that, like, you know what I mean? Like, even though like this is a hard turn, like it's so true. Like somebody needs to be able to be like, yo, like you took advantage of that person and feel comfortable in saying that, because he might not see it if she brought it up. You know what I mean? So that's a huge way of being accountable for women, even when you're not around women.
Speaking on to that point,
That was crazy.
no, I mean, yeah, with all trigger warnings included, I definitely think that part of that accountability, at least in my own personal experience, has definitely been, like I said, kind of like protecting the women in my life from men from the men at all. And I think on a personal level, like, I guess kind of how I want to challenge that, or how I've challenged that in my head is, not challenge that, but like how I've thought about it in my head is like as I've seen myself go out of my way to protect women or go out of my way, I also want to uplift the men around me too. But I definitely think that the hardest thing when I've thought about like how a community can do that, you know what I mean? Like how a community can really uplift men to be that driving force, because like I've seen those communities. I'm born of some of those communities. Like, and I protect my older sisters and my older brother's kids and daughters with all my heart and soul, because that's that's the kind of man my dad was, and that's the kind of dad my dad is. Even though he's flawed in his own right, he still uplifted women around him. But I'm sorry, I'm kind of missing the conclusion. But in total, it's hard seeing like just because I had that benefit does not mean a lot of other people had that benefit. And I noticed and recognized, even in my immediate friend group, even being from East Oakland, that they didn't really have that many men in their lives that stepped up like that. That they didn't have that opportunity for that, because of whatever situations, what have you. But I don't know. It's hard to speak about the actions of an individual as a man when it comes to accountability, and how to, especially in that more physical space, like when we can stand up, when we should stand up, when those that are able choose not to. It's hard to bridge that gap as a man without also crossing the fragile boundaries between how men even communicate. Because I feel like that's a thing too. Like, how do we even communicate with other men when we don't have the frameworks or spaces for it? And we have to create those spaces. We have to create those spaces in those ways for men to gain that knowledge and gain that language to communicate about that without butting heads. Because like I've seen a lot of people I've seen people die stepping up for a woman on international. You know what I mean? Legitimately. And people worry about that. Like, I've had OGs tell me, you don't step up for her because that pimp will kill you. Don't step up for her because, you're going to get into a fight you don't really want. Even in the contemporary, it happens at the lake. You know what I mean? Like, there's all these situations where it's like, when you can, is it going to kill you too? You know what I mean? Like, can you stop this wave of toxic masculinity without a group effort, or without the language for it? My bad.
You touched on quite a bit, and everybody says something great that I would love to jump in on. So somehow I'm going to try and keep it short. But when I started by talking about evolution, and we talk about thinking about the changes of how you show up and how people show up in your life. In my perspective, I grew up similar with you. I had a lot of women around me. I've had nothing but positive experiences. My father wasn't in my life, and so it was my mother, my grandmother, my sister, my aunts, and a couple of uncles that provided that male figure in my space. But what I found is that because I was so familiar with female energy and that relationship as a youth, my expectations moving through life were different in that I just expected that commonality, that respect, and move through life with that view, but recognizing that wasn't the norm. And so I was socialized out of that. When you talk about men and having the language and the frameworks to be able to talk about men, I consider myself to be on the fluidity spectrum. I'm more feminine than most men are comfortable identifying with when it comes to their energy. Like, that's cool for me. I'm still a masculine identifying man, but I'm more feminine. But that's okay, and I've also found that it leaves me a little isolated in certain rooms, because when I advocate for women, a lot of men don't like to hear that in a safe space for men. In a safe space for men. So then it becomes this interesting place of, all right, well, how do I advocate for women, but also maintain the safe space in this man's circle?
So, very interesting. Agree with you a lot on, again, we're here. But my thing is, my love for black women is a little bit stronger than my fear for men. So I don't have the argument of if I need to defend a woman in a situation that I know, obviously, I know right from wrong as an individual. I'm only going off my perception, my perspective. So dealing with toxic masculinity, that's not really a concern of mine, because at the end of the day, if you're doing something incorrect, or I feel like you're doing something that I feel like is not beneficial to us as a united front, that point, then I have to let you know that this is not okay. You know what I mean? I do know that some people have a hard time with communicating with men. I think that's it comes like a maturity thing. I think we have to mature a lot to kind of have a better way of communicating with each other. But just touch bases on a couple other things. Accountability for me, because I didn't really touch on what accountability was. It's exactly what we're talking about, being accountable in all spaces and in any capacity. If we're in a group setting where it's all women, I see women are doing something that I don't agree with, it's the same thing. It goes both ways. And I think that's a personal growth thing. I'm not saying that I'm a hoe, I'm gonna be like up here, but I'm always try to do the right thing in all environments, and especially when it's harmful for people who look like me, and we mirror each other. So.
But I would also say that even as a black woman, I've had trouble communicating to my male best friends, like when they've done something that's wrong, especially as a young person. And I think that definitely goes back to your point around evolution, but then I think also just making sure that like our younger selves get that language to really advocate for ourselves and other people. And I think that that's something that's really missing from just the like maturation of being like an adolescent. Like, who's really having those kinds of conversations with us when we're young people?
When I was younger, I had to understand what's normal and what's not. And that's one of the things that I love about the show, I May Destroy You, because even as my 29-year-old self, there were things that I didn't know that I blame myself for, where like you look at it on TV and you're like, nah, that wasn't my fault. Like because I didn't have the language, I took a lot of accountability for things that I shouldn't have taken accountability in terms of, things that happened towards me. And how do you explain that to children or to yourself when that trauma is now just there? Like, you can't just leave it. I do think it's so weird, because when I'm in spaces like this, like the men around are like, y'all are so on the right page, and like I'm so happy that there's, men who process like you all, but out in the world, like that is just not my experience. And it's like, okay, well, back to accountability. Is it my fault for who I'm surrounding myself with? Because I thought I did a good job, or who I'm, picking, but then I always end up in these same situations where like I'm just hurt in more ways than one. And then I have to be accountable and dealing with that on my own, because nobody else is gonna recognize that. And, you know, I think that I come off very strong and people see me as very strong, but it's like, yo, like, and then I get enraged because with men specifically, I do so much that I risk so much. I risk my work to make sure that I'm advocating right. My activism is all day, every day. And I fight so hard, and then my brain is just all over the place, and I'm then overwhelmed.
I feel like that's the balancing act that Black women specifically have to deal with. Because me, myself, I personally, every single man who has like hurt me, rocked me to my core, made me feel like question who I am and mentally, physically caused me harm has been a Black man. But every man that has loved me correctly and in the ways that I needed, who was there for me and cared for me and nurtured me, has been a Black man. So when you submerge yourself into your community, your neighborhood, your family, the way that Black women do, it's always this balancing act. And some days I'm like, y'all could go march for yourselves. Like, don't call me, don't speak to me, because I'm feeling like it's not balanced anymore. Now I've encountered too many men who have made me feel, like Taylor said, enraged or upset. But then some days I'm like, oh, y'all want plates? What y'all need? You know, like I feel this other side of like really feeling like I'm being cared for and nurtured. So a lot of times it's like we have to come through and find this balance for ourselves, because, and that's literally with any kind of community. There's good, there's bad. But I know a lot of Black women who are on this side of the scale, who haven't had that, those men to come through and nurture them and care for them. But they're still trying to create a balance, but there's nothing on the other side of the scale. So all they're doing is just having to, like Taylor said, be accountable for things that they shouldn't have to be accountable for, to take things off this scale to come back to a balance. And that's not fair. It's unfair that we have to endure the trauma, be accountable, and make it right. You know, it's unfair when we have to do all the things that we should be doing together to make this an equal feeling, where it's like you feel nurtured and supported, I feel nurtured and supported. But when the scale is off, I feel like that's when a lot of Black men call Black women angry, or they just bitter. But you're not seeing the work that we have to do to even get to a point where we can even have a conversation for you to even think that I'm bitter. Because I know a lot of Black women who just don't deal with it at all, especially outside of their family, or if they may have a partner, they don't want to do that work because they've done so much work. So I feel like we're always fighting to be on this equal feeling, so that we don't come off as angry or bitter, or feeling like, you know, niggas ain't shit, or whatever that a lot of women, gets placed on Black women. But I think the work is also not being equal.
I think the expectation, I think one thing you got to do as a Black woman, I think you guys should probably take a little bit of a break. Like, I think sometimes you guys are overwhelmed a lot, because you have the right to be, there's days that you can feel upset. That's cool, you can be upset. I mean, if your heart's in the right place, you got the right to be upset. I don't know why it's like almost like if you guys are emotional about something that you feel like you're doing us a disservice. If you still love us, it doesn't matter. You got the right to have days that you don't want to march for us. You have the right for that.
But abandonment is real. Like,
but it's somebody else's abandonment. What about yourself? Like, you can keep putting forth the Black man, but at the end of the day, what about yourself? You have to still have, that is still something that you guys don't consider. You guys are always trying to do for other people. It's okay to take a break. Like I said, it's okay. And the activism is going to be there because you're going to come back because you love us, right? So it's okay. You don't have to feel guilty about that. And I think that's what's happening, is a lot of Black women are feeling guilty when they feel like they don't want to protest, they don't want to march. And sometimes it is overbearing. It is overwhelming, and it is a lot of work. And if you're not feeling appreciated, you're not feeling valued in that space, yes, you have the right to take a break. There's nothing wrong with that.
Can I just say that if I listened to all the Black women in my upbringing tell me that Black men ain't shit, I was destined to feel and grow up to be ain't shit. An ain't shit nigga, because that's what I hear all the time is niggas ain't shit. And I try to remain empathetic to that perspective, recognizing all of the nature of, and we've brought up that topic, the nature of things. And a mentor of mine always talks about the nature of things. And if we were, as people, to be able to better understand the nature of things, then we would take things less personal and really understand how we move in the space as man and woman, as opposed to how we move in the space as an individual with trauma and bondage. And so I personally don't think I ain't shit. So perhaps but I do understand that there's a diametric difference between the way things actually are and the way we perceive things to be. And I think it has a lot to do with the nature of things. And you said something like, as a woman, you have to be aware and you have to be cognizant of so much growing up. And, you create community as a part of your nature. Like, it's natural for you. And I don't think it has been my nature as a man to think in creating community. I haven't been brought up to think about all of the nuances and all of the things that go into building and making and sustaining a community. I've been brought up to set a target and go after that target relentlessly.
That's very dead on, actually, as a black man. I didn't think about community building community rather, until I got older and I started doing entrepreneurial things. That's when I started to realize how important that was.
Right. So we have a lifetime of education in one facet of life, and you have a lifetime of education multitasking in multiple facets of life. Those things lead to different outcomes, right? And so to expect things to just change overnight is difficult. So how do you show up in a way that allows other people to be received differently too?
There.
I want to uplift the black one in the room because I mean, if y'all want to talk, I only got one point.
No, say it. I want to hear your whole chest.
So
I want to hear every thought on your mind.
when I think about applied theory, right? I think about this idea, because no, hear me out, because I don't mean to disagree with y'all here. But I do want to say I think what I believe when it comes to, like, especially when it's like the saying niggas ain't shit. I definitely agree, niggas ain't shit. We aren't shit. I'm not shit because I'm a part of a system that systemically attacks women, and I benefit from that. Like even without even without actively doing it, just me being a man. Even when on a personal note, in my day-to-day struggles, I grew up as a homeless youth. Or a houseless youth for a very long time, which is why after I went to boarding school and I got housing, so it was great. But when I was in school, when I was in a home, I was staying with my mom and my sister, right? And I recognized how many times, not my dad, which I appreciated, but my uncles, my brother, and other male members of our communal family would speak over women. For example, just as like a small example. And I recognized, I didn't think it was that serious. I was like, it's whatever, like people talk loud. Men talk loud. Like, they're all big dudes. Of course, they're talking loud. But I started to recognize it wasn't just big men doing it. It was small men. My little nephew started speaking over my sister. You know what I mean? And you start learning that. You start learning that as you're growing up, and you pick it up over your life course. Now, that's not necessarily killing a black woman. You know what I mean? Like that's not gonna take away their life, but that's gonna take away potential opportunities in the future if you can't respect the fact that a black woman is talking. If you that's just a small thing that picks up onto a bigger scale of the needles on top of the haystack that breaks the black woman's back. And so I think one of the things that black men need to recognize is that yes, we ain't shit. And but not in the sense of individual level. Like y'all said, it's not about individually. Individually, we have to work to change that, and we owe it to the universe to change that if we want our kids to live better than us. And I think that's part of our day-to-day, our goal. Even for men, our goal is to be successful. And then later, as we get older, we kind of start thinking about families, how I'm locked down or something, But women start off family off top. You know what I mean? It's about multitasking. You got to be on. Like, my sister was washing dishes. She was washing everybody's dishes at like 13, and I was 7, and I could have did it. You know what I mean? Like, I really could have, but she was. But again, not to derail your point, but I definitely think it's a difference.
I had some for that. Actually, that was actually right on cue. That's actually perfect. Go ahead, go, Ma. It's time to.
I have a
But-
question for the men.
Yeah.
If you all are okay with that. Two questions. So one, when we did the in real life that was actually in person, a guy brought up this fact, like he was frustrated but confused on what to do. He was like, yo, like so many women come up to me with their, stories on how they engage with men in the negative ways. But he's like, yo, like I feel like, yo, I'm a good guy. Why do I constantly have to feel berated by all of these stories on how other men are not treating you? Like I'm a good person and it's a lot for me. So I want to hear the men's response to that. And then I also want to hear how you would like, in all the ways that you are, but in additional ways that you would like women to be accountable for y'all specifically, so we can know, like we have our ways that y'all might not even see, like your plate, like the fact that your plate a little heavy because we know you a grown man, like, you know what I mean? But I would love to know that, like what y'all consider, what y'all would love for how we can be accountable. And then again, how you feel of you guys identifying as good men, but having to always be responsible and be accountable for bad men.
So I'll start this off. Like I said, I had a lot of black women friends growing up, right? So it really didn't bother me until I got older. I was like, what happened was I had my glow up. That's probably what happened. So what happened was the evolution started to kick in. Because I had a best friend, I mean, she probably gonna watch this anyway, but I had a best friend from elementary school up until I was 24, right? We've been best friends. We dated here and there, right? But when we became adults, she was still dating these other guys, right?
So I had this friend up to 20. We dated here and there.
Yeah, like we dated, like.
Snuck that in there.
No, but I don't count it. It's not a part of my dating pool because it was junior high, right? So we dated here and there. We always had like little flirting here and there, right? But she ended up dating this guy. She ended up having a baby, right? All this other stuff. It was when I was showing up for her more than other men have. I'm assuming. I'm not going to say that because she's going to watch this. I was showing up more for her than other men have. So what ended up happening was that was the reason why she ended up starting probably to like me. I have a tendency to kind of always show up for black women because I had a lot of black friends, black female friends. So what ended up happening was, same thing, I had a friend that I was friends with for a couple of years. We dated, right? And then the glow up hit. Then she wanted to talk again, and it was like, no, because I sat here and dealt with you with all the ex-boyfriends you dealt with, and take my man card if you want. I was putting people on game. You feel me? Like I was telling you when people were wrong, when this wasn't the perfect opportunity for you, or you could do better than this. I was that guy. I was the guy that the boyfriends didn't like. You know what I'm saying? If I'm gonna be frank, I'm just gonna keep it. I'm being frank and very Frank Mitchell about it. It is what it is. Like it's okay because I can fight. So the thing was. So what happened was that situation it consistently worked out until my last relationship when we were friends and we ended up dating, and it actually worked out for a little bit. You feel what I mean? So I think what happens with most women is that because let's just say I exfoliate, right? A little exfoliation, and what ends up happening is now.
You put lotion on too?
I use shea butter, so. What I'm saying is, so then what happened was after that situation, now it's like, okay, now it's like you want to start dating. Now you want to start dating a good guy. Now you want to date the guy that's been consistent because women like consistency. You know what I mean? And if a man is being constantly consistent, it changes the dynamic. But the thing was, you didn't want me in the beginning. You know what I mean? I exfoliate too much. It's a little too soft for you. You know what I mean? I didn't get manicures and pedicures, but you know what I mean? I got a facial. You know what I'm saying? And it was too soft. You know what I mean? I think black women they have this thing of liking hyper masculine men. I'm gonna leave that where it's at, but y'all can.
I know this is a question for the men, but I want to pose another question.
Wait.
No, listen. Okay. To go with this question though. So you guys talk about how women can be more accountable and things like that, but I want you to start thinking about this. Are you a good man or are you the best man around?
Y'all two answer. How do you feel about being the good guy if you consider yourself to be a good guy and always having to, hear the ain't shit nigga shit? And then how do you want specifically women to be accountable for you? Like the floor, whatever comes to mind.
Ooh, the ain't shit nigga shit. Well, let me pull up on that.
Pull up, like a pull up class?
Pull up. Man, it's actually really sad for me because the work I do is specifically geared around black men and men of color. And I enter these spaces, and that is often a conversation that I hear and I don't like to be a part of because it continues to perpetuate the narrative in many ways. So even though I respect where you're going with this, I think part of the narrative is changing the narrative, and we can't continue to say niggas ain't shit if we want them to be shit. So that's one thing. But I empathize because I live in West Oakland, and I'm not from here. I don't claim to be from here, but I do try to hold it down. And my block, I've seen it change over the last 3 years. And the women that have come to my place have consistently told me, oh, well, I mean, this block ain't safe. And I'm looking around the block, and I'm like, there's nothing but white people over here walking their dogs, looking at me as I'm the one or two remaining black people on the block, as if though I'm the odd person out. I'm like, y'all just got here. I said, how is this block not safe? Like, all these white people are investing in my block right now. But it took me maybe 4 times hearing the same thing from 4 different women to truly understand what was being said to me. And it wasn't until that moment that I really took a pause and understood what it takes to empathize with somebody. Because it wasn't until this person explained it to me in a way that I could hear it that allowed me to hear everybody else's story. And then it was less about the block being not safe. It had nothing to do with the conditions of the block today. It had to do with the psychological impacts of being on that block from years ago that came back when she was on the block today. And that changes the narrative completely, because now that block is psychologically and physiologically no longer safe to that person. And me, as a black man walking on that block, don't share those same feelings, or don't bring up those same emotions when I walk on that street. And so for me, it was just like, I couldn't understand it. But when I could place myself in the emotions of fear and recognizing that, oh, pimps used to walk on this block, and heroin used to be sold on this block, and you grew up here 20 years ago, and like these are the things that you're feeling when you see this block, even though Becky's walking down the street. Now I can understand. And I'm about to be 37, don't let this baby face fool you. But it took me a long ass time to be able to just understand simply, like, communication is a motherfucker. And so trying to get across that barrier of, I ain't shit nigga, and you aren't an angry black woman, doesn't seem like it's that tough. But it's a big gap. It's a big gap.
And then how would you like black women to be accountable to you?
Yeah, I think in the same way that I try to be accountable to them, and just one is asking or telling me what you need. Right. So much of my time is spent trying to be responsible for feelings and accountable to things that I can't see or don't know, the expectations that haven't been communicated. And some of that is unfair to say because you don't exactly know how to communicate everything you need. And I think men are guilty of that because we don't have the language. We haven't spent enough time doing it. But at least trying to communicate what you need. And I'm sure that's like beating a dead horse because we do that. But then also placing yourself empathetically outside of your own shoes and recognizing that your space is your own, your domain is your own, but a man's domain is his own, and that other individual is their own. And how do we do more to lean into that person's psyche, that person's experience, and then answer and respond from there as opposed to where we are?
Jacob? First of all, I just need all y'all to be clones and just populate yourselves because even you suck, I'm breathing different. I'm talking to you, I'm like, wasn't the consistent people who, right.
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Okay. The first question is, how do you deal with, if you consider yourself to be a good guy, how do you deal with always having to, fight or hear or be reminded of the narrative that like niggas ain't shit and all the bad things that men do and how they're not there as a man who is there. So how and acknowledges the bigger picture. So how do you feel? Is it exhausting? Like blah blah blah. And then the second question is, how would you like women to be accountable for you? Like what is in your specific unique way?
So when someone, like if someone were walking to me like, you know, niggas ain't shit.
Well, in these conversations where like if I didn't, we was just like, y'all these men.
Well, you know, like I said earlier, I would probably agree, and I would be like, you know, I would be like, yeah, you know, but I respect that. Having heard y'all points about narrative shifting, that's a very good point about the intention we put with our words and our manifestations. I do disagree with, you know, if you a little kid, you're a little boy, and you know someone's only affirming to you what a man means with negative reinforcements, then you're never gonna know what the actual things to do are. That being said, you can't really blame the mamas or caregivers because, you know, not saying they don't know what it means to be a man, but at least with like, if all they're getting from society is these certain scripts, then what are they able to show you? You know, like that's kind of a two-way street there as well, because getting raised is a whole different thing. But again, I would agree just because the system we're in teaches us to be ain't shit. But I would also rebuttal by saying, but we're working on it. Legitimately, we are working on it. And sometimes sadly, that's at the expense of people's livelihoods. And I think that's where or lives and livelihoods. I think that's where that anger and that's where that personal appeal comes from. Because just like race, we hold our gender, we hold our identities close to us. And when you're already marginalized in one way, when you're already marginalized in one way, when you add that extra level of scope, it adds not just the glass ceiling, but the extra weight on the shoulders. So of course, black women are gonna hold it closer to their chest when they say niggas ain't shit. When it's legit, like, you know, if all men have shown you that, if they all shown you your ass, all you're gonna see is the ass. So I would agree, but I would say we're working on it, and I would say, I would say we're working on it. I would say we're trying to work on it. Because we're not there yet, seriously, you know what I mean? We're not there yet, and I think that brings me great shame as a man. To recognize that we are not there as a collective, and even though I am doing, you know, what brings me pride is doing it within my own individual collective. What I can control, whatever control means, whatever I can control and push and advocate for with the men in my life, I push with tooth and nail. Now, you know, I push with full vigor. But it definitely brings me shame when I see men at all showing their ass. Because it happens, and it's going to continue to happen until more and more of us take that step towards that communal vision and understanding.
Can I say one thing along with that? I think that also goes back to accountability as well, because I think that you can do both, like recognize historical, societal context and reframe, but it's really hard to do one without the other, because then you're not taking accountability for that toxicity that already exists. So.
If I just add this last little bit, like this last wee bit, just very little, like, so I do agree, like the niggas ain't shit, right? But then it's like, I do agree, but here's how I agree though. I agree that there are men who aren't shit. I don't think the collective of men aren't shit. The men that I know aren't shit. The men that I am around aren't shit, because I wouldn't have aren't shit niggas, ain't shit niggas. They aren't not, you know what I mean? So, pretty, yes, they are good people, okay? The people around me are good people. And I think that's kind of the idea, because I know you were saying like there's certain, I don't get offended by it, but I always want to defend it, right? When you were saying like there's certain women you had black men who have loved you, right? And you have black men who have not loved you, right? And the thing is, you said like you have a balance because you've had both. I've had all good men around me, so when you say niggas ain't shit, and I'm like, well, I know I'm cool, you know what I'm saying? And I know that the people around me are cool, so I think that's what men are. Just because I'm defending it doesn't mean I'm offended by it. It means that I want you to have a different perspective on that too. Yeah. But I just want to leave that on the floor.
And if I
just last little bit.
Right. But people are prisms. Yeah. You see your friends as your friends. If I'm dating your friend is my man. So he might be like, oh, what you need, bro? You want to go play ball? You need some money? And then come home and mollywop me and knock all the dishes off the table. So you have to have that understanding. That's where the real nuance is. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who a person is to you. In my regard, in your regard. If I see this person as ain't shit and you see them as a great person, that doesn't necessarily define who they are. That's just pieces to the puzzle. What's the whole picture? So I think it's important to understand that just because I see you this way does not mean that's who you are.
Yeah.
So I think that's just really important. And
Or is that the convenience of how we say it? Because ain't shit niggas definitely have positive characteristics that we leave out of the narrative.
I will also say me taking accountability. I'm not always the best person to people. I'm a great ass person, but some people don't see it somewhat where like they'll just ignore everything about it. Or they'll feel the most intense by like, whatever.
Yeah, and I mean it as in, when I say it doesn't matter, I mean it in the context of what I'm saying. So it wouldn't matter if I'm like, yo, nigga ain't shit. And you're like, well, that's my nigga. He is shit to me. And in the same context of you saying this is a great person, it wouldn't matter to me in the context of how I know them.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm gonna be quiet now.
How you want women to be accountable? 2 sentences to you.
To give the same I give.
Yes.
You know, like just meet me equitably.
That's like on a fortune cookie or something.
Not equal, but equitable. It's about capacity.
Oof. Ever since I moved to California, it's been capacity. I mean, right? That's fighting words. That's at work. I can't do this project. I done got the capacity. I'm taking a self-care day.
Didn't get to define her capacity. It was defined for her. So I feel like even my mom, she got a little bit, but now I feel like it's my duty to define that as a celebration of her and to say like, hey, look, the work you did wasn't in vain. So that's how I look at it. It's the evolution of like, the door was like cracked. First it was closed, and it was like cracked open. I came through, I kicked that motherfucker wide open, so now I could be like, no.
Now I can see now. All right, so wrap this one up.
And